Well, hello, and welcome to the Pen to Publish podcast from the two Alexas. If you're penning and publishing, or even just planning to pen and publish, you're in the right place. I'm Alexa Whitten, author, typesetter, and independent publisher, and
I'm Alexa Tewksbury, author, editor, and proofreader. You can never have too many Alexas. We love getting feedback, so do please review and subscribe. And we also have a group full of like-minded writers, which you can join over on Facebook and get your writing results happening. It's called the Writers Refinery, and the link will be in the show notes that accompany these podcasts. So let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to episode 5 of the Pen to Publish podcast with our usual hosts of Alexa and Alexa. And today we're going to be talking about common questions that come up. These we get asked all the time. And in fact, there's a bunch of questions that I got asked so many times with children's book, I decided to actually write a book because I was sick of answering the same questions over and over again. So we're not going to be answering all of those in this episode, because actually a lot of the stuff that I talk about in the children's book that come up, we're going to be talking about in the next episode, episode 6. But today we're going to be talking about the common questions that we get asked all the time. And we're going to take it in turns with answering them. So, Alexa, what's the first question that you have?
Well, the first question, so actually I've got two here that I've probably been asked in different ways, but I thought this was the way this particular lady asked it was quite good. This is a lady called Sarah Ball, who's in our Facebook group. And I know she wants to write a children's book, but she's struggling with coming up with a starting point. So her question is, how do you come up with the idea for an adventure? And I think we've talked about in another episode, we've talked about sort of plotting and how you do all that. But this made me really think and try and focus on how you actually start if you want to write a book, but you don't have an idea. So first of all, which again, we keep saying, decide on your target audience. You need to know who you're writing for before you begin anything. So if you're writing for children, you need to know your age group and what children in that age group are reading. So do your research before you begin. And then I would say read lots of books similar to the sort of book you want to write. Just steep yourself in the genre, because that can not only kickstart ideas, but it also helps you to see how the kind of stories that you want to write are constructed, how other people are putting them together, how they're creating their characters. So try to read with an analytical eye if you can. Then think about how you could begin. So with a character, now I think, Sarah, you have a character, but you don't know what to do with this character, but you really want to write a book about them. So you could, other ways to begin. So a character or a place. You might have a place in mind that you'd like to set a story, or a snippet of conversation that you think that could be something. So whatever it is that's in your head that forms the beginning of your story, whatever is your starting point, the thing that makes you want to write, just begin to expand on it by asking yourself some questions. Now, I was trying to think, and I was raiding my bookshelves, because there's a drama practitioner, and I came across this asking questions in some drama work that I was doing a few years ago. And that was how he was recommending building performance pieces. Just keep asking questions to build the story, but it works for any type of story. So, for example, if you've chosen a character like you have, Sarah, just start in a really simple way. Who or what is this character? Is it a person, a child, an animal, an alien? What's their name? Where are they? Why are they where they are? Who could they meet? Is the person or the animal or the child or the alien they're going to meet good for them? Are they going to be friends? If not, why not? Where's the conflict? What's the problem that needs to be solved? Is this a story of deception, of jealousy, of revenge, of reconciliation, of buried treasure? What could happen? Why are these two characters there? And then have a think about other characters who could maybe get involved. Whose side are they on? How can they help you to build out your plot? Now, I don't know if these are really old-fashioned now, especially the pencil and paper type, but I love spider diagrams. I like to just, when I'm plotting out a story, I like to take a piece of paper, and that's one of the first things I'll do. And then I just let the story start to balloon out by asking myself questions just like those and answering them. So I like the fact that I've got my piece of paper, I've got my physical pencil, it's all very physical, and then I can just keep adding to it, and I can keep referring back to it and amending it. And then I've got something that I feel I can start to flesh out into a proper story plan. So it's a really useful springboard. And just by keeping on asking yourself questions, you'd be surprised how a plot idea can start to evolve. That's certainly been my experience with writing for children, because sometimes I've been commissioned to write a book and I've thought, well, I have no idea. But just by working in that way, the ideas have kind of come. Mm-hmm. And then you could also even make up some writing prompts for yourself to see if that sparks anything. So you could imagine you wake up in the middle of the night and everyone else in the house has vanished. Imagine you could fly. Suppose you open your mouth one day and realize you can only talk backwards. Suppose your best friend tells you they turn into a dragon every 29th of February. Suppose you discover a bird's nest in a hedge, but that's definitely not a bird sitting in it. So if you're looking for an idea for an adventure story, it's really about just letting your imagination go wherever it wants to. Don't put any blocks on it, but do make sure that the ideas are going to be appropriate to the genre of book you want to write. And if it's for children, for the age group of your readership. I think there are times, it's happened to me, when stories will just pop into your head when you're out for a walk or when you're in the shower, when you're not actually thinking about writing at all. But then there are other times when, to get that initial story idea, you really do need to just sit with it and focus on it and keep asking those questions and filling in those balloons on your spider diagram.
I think there should definitely also be a beginning, middle and end, shouldn't there? So there should be some kind of progression from the character starts at point A, and perhaps they're slightly different when they come to the end of the story. You don't want a character that sort of doesn't develop, do you, at all? I mean, some of the most boring books I've read, and I've read a fair share of boring books, the character doesn't develop in any way. Yes. It's just sort of nasal gazing about their life, but they haven't really been on any journey, and they're not the type of books I enjoy. So
no, you want to see a progression. I think just what Sarah was saying was, I need to start, but I don't know how to get an idea. So I suppose once you've got your idea, then you can start expanding it and looking at your structure. But it's just sometimes getting that initial idea. What can you do to kickstart that initial idea, which for me is a spider diagram? And doing lots of reading other people's writing as well, not copying it, but just letting it spark other ideas.
I mean, it could be anything. They find a key. What does the key belong to? Or they find a note that's intriguing and that takes them on a trail. In fact, Lee Child's books, I don't know if you've ever read any of his, they always start out with Reacher, the main character, walking along a road. Like, that's how every story starts. And then it's because he either gets a ride with someone and something happens that then takes him on somewhere else, or he's in a diner and he overhears a conversation, or he finds something that he knows he shouldn't find, like a bag full of money, and he's like, what's this about? You know, the premise is always the same. Reacher is a drifter. He has no address. He doesn't live anywhere. He's usually going from A to B with no real aim. And then a whole book happens because he stumbles across something.
Yeah.
That's the premise for all his books. And he's written, 18, 19, 20 books now?
Wow.
So,
and that is just, isn't it? That is letting your imagination go, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost like, and now what? So he's walking along a road, and now what?
Yeah. And Lee Child actually says he doesn't plan his books either.
Oh, right.
He's a pantster. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah,
so
I wonder if he did that from the beginning. I wonder if his very first book, whether he didn't plan, whether he just kind of launched into it.
Don't know. But anyway, good tips there. Fabulous. Right. So the question that I get asked all the time, and probably you do as well, Alexa, is what size should the book be?
It's like
again, I'm going to say the answer is it depends on your genre, depends who your target audience is, and it depends on the style of book that you want to write. If you're writing a picture book, it can be a variety of sizes. Anything from the Mr. Men size books, which is 150 by 150, up to the Gruffalo style books, or even A4 if you want to. It's totally up to you, but do your research. Who's the target audience? What books are they reading? What's the most popular? And also, what can you afford? Because the bigger book you go, the more expensive they are to print. So I think it all depends on what book it is you're writing. If it's a chapter book for children, for instance, I would go with the very common B format, which is 128 by 198. That's B format, very, very popular, and it fits nicely in a children's hand. You don't want to go much bigger than that. But if it's a business book, it can be any size. It depends on what kind of book it is. If it's got lots of tables and diagrams, then you're going to want to go fairly big. If it's just information, then you can go with Demi or B format. It's up to you. Do your research, find out what other books in the genre are, and go with that. I can give advice in terms of when I see the content, but I think really you should know before you start, because that way I know you've done your research. So it all depends who the book is for. That's what size the book should be.
And picture books are, because we've got an author that we're working with who I think has gone for a smaller sized picture book.
150 by 150.
Yeah. Yes, because a lot of the ones we've done are bigger than that, aren't they? But so I suppose, again, you need to think about with that your illustrations, the type of illustrations you want, the number of words you're looking at having on a page, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because if you have a go for the smaller size, you don't want to find that you're cramming lots of words on the page, because that's not ideal for small children.
Exactly.
Well, kind of going along with that one, it's another one of those how long is a piece of string questions. How long does it take to write a book? It's a common question, but it's a really tough one to answer because there are so many variables. It's sort of, what genre are you writing in? Do you need to do a lot of research? How long do you envisage your finished book will be? And how much time do you have available to write? That's a really huge one. If you're able to write for a few hours a day, every day, then you'll obviously get your book finished much more quickly than if you can only write for a couple of hours at the weekend. And how quickly do you personally write? Do you find the words just tumble out, or is it a slow process for you? Authors, professional, well-known authors, they take different amounts of time to get their books out. My daughter loves the American author John Green. I don't know if you've come across him, Alexa.
No.
I think his most well-known book is probably The Fault in Our Stars, which is really sad. And it was made into a film as well. His other books of his might be films now too. But he will take several years over one book. And he's not alone in that. I read that J.D. Salinger, my son loves The Catcher in the Rye, but J.D. Salinger took 10 years to write The Catcher in the Rye. And it's not a very long book. And then there are other prolific authors who can turn a book round in 2 or 3 months or less time than that.
Yeah.
So there's no way really to be able to answer that question definitively. And maybe the time it takes isn't as important as having the goal of writing a book and working your way at your pace towards that goal. I think it can help you with the timings if you impose a deadline on yourself, but when you do that, try to be realistic so that you don't end up disappointed and frustrated with yourself if you don't meet it. You can, to help yourself, as an editor, I'm booked up a few months in advance. So if a particular author wants to work with me, they need to get in my schedule a good 2 or 3 months ahead of when they want their book working on. So if it gives you a self-imposed deadline, why not book a slot with me, with your editor, so that you have to have it finished by that point, because that's when your editor's expecting it. Obviously, it's different if you have a publisher deadline, then you'll need to schedule in your writing time carefully so that you meet that deadline too. But otherwise, if it's your first book, maybe just find out what your pace is, program in some writing slots over a month, stick to them and see what happens. If a book takes 3 years to write, or if it takes 5 years to write, the length of time is no reflection on your writing ability or the quality of your work.
And also, don't forget, we've got the Magic Writing Time Machine that we have in our group as well. That's the Facebook group, Writers Refinery. And what we do is we schedule in an hour a week. You can come in, join a Zoom room, and you can get an hour's worth of writing. Now, an hour a week might not be enough, but an hour a week is better than no hours a week. So that's one of the benefits of coming in and joining the group, all the details of which are in the show notes.
It's a silent Zoom, so you join it, there's no chat, you just join, and you know that you're writing along and you're supported because on your screen you'll see other writers also writing along.
Exactly. It's very popular. So
yes.
come on in and join that.
Yes. Oh, sometimes, just going back to how long does it take, it can also be helpful to set yourself a word count. Like if you think it's realistic for you to write 2,000 words a week, see when you start out, if you manage to achieve that in a week, maybe 4 days a week, you could try and write 500 words a day. Just see what's realistic for you. But it sometimes it's quite nice sometimes to see your word count going up and that you're kind of hitting the target that you've set for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to then jump to this question, which again, I get very often. How many pages should my book be? It should be exactly 64 if you're writing a business book, and it should be exactly 28 if you're writing a children's book. Again, I'm joking. Again, it depends. It's up to you. There is no set number, apart from the only set number that you have is if you want to get it printed by an independent printer and you want a specifically bound spine, as in a proper spine, not a stapled spine, then your page count for a children's book needs to be a minimum of 32 pages. So that's the minimum. If you're going to only print on KDP, it can be as little as 24, but you won't be able to get anything on the spine. You won't be able to get any writing on the spine. Those are really the only limitations that you have.
And so, with the number of pages, that also can include the pages at the beginning, so the title page at the beginning and the title page at the end. Yep. So if you find you've written a book and it's maybe 27 pages, or that's what it'll come out at, the end pages, you can have your about the author and
front matter and back matter can add to those pages. So in total, the book needs to be 32 pages in total. So you're going to have probably 4 pages of front matter, and you're probably going to have at least 2 pages of back matter. The same with a business book. I would say for an average size business book, you don't want anything less than 122 pages. But don't forget, probably the first 8 pages are going to be front matter by the time you take into consideration title page, title verso, dedication, contents, a forward, right? That's going to probably be, and that's going to be at least 8 pages. And then the back matter is probably going to be acknowledgements about the author and what to do next. So that's going to be another 4 pages. So excluding those, I would say you're not going to probably want much less than what I've said. Children's book, again, do your research, go and have a look, see what else is out there, and go from there. I don't think when Kylie wrote her first ink cap, I don't know, did she have a page count in mind? I think she did.
She probably didn't discuss that with me because I'm not doing the designing.
She didn't really discuss it with me, other than the fact that she had a story to tell. And once the story was finished, obviously she had illustrations throughout her book too. So that helped obviously with the page count, because her black and white illustrations obviously bump up the page numbers. But the second book was longer than the first. Yes. So again, do research. Go and see what other authors in your genre for your age group are writing, and do an average, if that helps. And then work out how many words per page it's going to be. So talk to your typesetter, get them to do an average word count for the typeface that they're going to use. And then you'll figure out how many words per page, how many pages you want equals how many words you need to write.
So many aspects of this are about the research, aren't they? They're about, it's not just about reading and enjoying books, but it's about looking at all the technical side of it, and reading to see how someone else has achieved what they've written. Mm-hmm. So I suppose it's learning to be analytical in your reading. But obviously there are so many books. There are so many different types of book that you can dip into so that you build a basis for your own writing.
So which ones do you enjoy? At the end of the day, what appeals to you? Because, if you're going to be buying a children's book, what kind of book does your child like to read? go and, actually use your own experience rather than just go, right, well, I'm going to write a book, but I've got no clue what to do. Of course you do. You've got books in your own house. So go and have a look.
Yeah.
I don't know why they think we know all of this. Like, I don't know how many pages your book should be. Go do your research. Yeah. Anyway, right, what's next?
Okay. Well, another author in our group, Anthony Atfield, he's just written a children's book, which I will shortly be beginning to edit. And he's asked, any tips on moving from draft 1 to a complete rewrite for draft 2? Depending on the length of the book, this can be a daunting and somewhat demoralizing challenge. Are there any tips to maintain motivation or know what to change? So I think perhaps one of the most helpful things, the most helpful ways to think is that from the minute you start work on your book, every stage is a step in the process. So writing your book, writing your first draft, that's not it. That's just a step in the process. So it begins with an idea, you build on it and create a plan. How detailed the plan is up to you, but it's a good idea to have some kind of framework to work on. I think particularly for first-time writers. Some writers like to plot everything out. Others are happy just to have the bare bones, and then the fleshing out happens as they write. Then the next stage after the plan is the writing. But this is a first draft. It doesn't have to be perfect. It won't be perfect. It's not even meant to be perfect. It's just another step towards your goal of having a published book. So when you get to the end, which I know will have been a lot of hard work, but if you've got it embedded in your brain that this is just another step, then going back to work on a second draft will hopefully not feel quite so challenging. And I think before you go back to work on your second draft, your third draft, it's just really important to take a break for as long as you're able to between the drafts so that you're coming back to it with fresh eyes. If you can leave it alone for a month and go into all sorts of other things like paint the garage or dig the garden or anything, when you start to look at it again, you'll spot so much more than if you finish it one day and leap straight onto the second draft the next. You just need to clear your head really in between times so you can be more objective. I actually love the second draft stage. The really difficult work of dragging the story out of my head, making sure it's got all the elements, the beginning, the middle, the end, the characters, the plot twists, all the resolutions to the problems, all those things, that really difficult work is done. Now I can set to work shaping it and crafting it and making it the best that it can be. And that can actually be done in stages too, so that it's not too overwhelming. You can focus on different elements. So you can begin by focusing on your characterization and your dialogue. Then you can look at how is the plot working chapter by chapter? What's the pace like? Are there ways to make the narrative itself more interesting to read? Now, I know, Anthony, this is your question. You mentioned that your first draft was very long and you had to cut it down hugely. And I can see that that is a daunting prospect because I think you cut it down by getting on for half of the original word count. But when it comes to self-editing and changing things, it's just a matter of being really strict with yourself, constantly asking yourself, does this paragraph need to be there? Does it move the story forward? Does it reveal anything important about a character? Am I using too many words to get over a particular detail? What you're trying to do is pare your story down so that you engage your reader from beginning to end rather than losing them somewhere in the first couple of chapters. It's that, I think, did we mention this a few weeks ago? It's that kill all your darlings again.
Yeah.
Kill all your darlings. Just don't be precious about anything. And when you take something out, you don't have to just delete it, never to be seen again. You could save it. You could have a file of things that you have taken out in case they come in useful in another book. Mm-hmm. And also, I would say, keep your reader in mind when you work on the second and the third draft and however many you need to do. Just try to read from the reader's perspective, because that should really help you to see what needs to go. And obviously, when you pass your book to an editor, that's what they will be looking out for too, as well as working on the text line by line to make sure it flows beautifully and gives the reader that best possible experience. But it's important that you as the author get it into the best possible shape before handing it over for a professional edit. I think remembering that a book is a big project may also help. It's not something that can or should be done quickly. Even something as short as a children's picture book needs time and care dedicated to it. And as I say, it's a many-staged process, but each draft brings you closer to your goal of being a first-time author, second time, third time, fourth time. And I think not losing sight of that goal is what should be your motivator when it feels daunting and difficult. Because if you imagine how you're going to feel when that final draft is written and ready for publication, imagine, people saying, "Oh, I love your book." Just try to keep those things in mind on the tough days to help yourself make it as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah. I think be ruthless as well. Be ruthless.
Yes, definitely. I think you have to be.
Don't hold on to stuff that you think is good. Be ruthless. Honestly, I think your book would benefit from it. And also, the one thing that I find real common mistake first-time authors make, and that is they treat the reader like an idiot. And what they do is they explain everything, and you don't need to. Leave stuff that is like, oh, what's that about? You don't have to explain everything that's going on. If you're going to, say, lead your character development through dialogue, you don't need to give us a backstory. Give us the backstory through dialogue cleverly, and you can do that. But don't treat the reader like an idiot by explaining everything, because we can connect the dots. And actually, it's way more interesting when we do, because then this is the lovely thing about being in a book group, is when we discuss a book and people take different learnings from their interpretation because they haven't been spoon-fed by the author. And I think it takes a brave author not to spoon-feed the reader. And I know, again, I'm going to mention Lee Child again with this. He's really good at this. He doesn't spoon-feed the reader at all. And his dialogue is really pared back. It's just the crucial stuff. And I think it makes for a tense mood. The story moves with pace, which is what you want. I don't want to know how the character is feeling. Show me how the character is feeling. The whole show don't tell. I think it's really lazy when authors fill us with stuff that we don't need to know. I think it's just lazy because they're just wanting to get the number of words on the page. So show, don't tell, be ruthless, and really make your dialogue count.
Yes. I love books with lots of dialogue.
I do too. And I like books with good dialogue. That is, and I'm not going to go on about my pet peeve because I talk about it all the time, but good dialogue really will make or break your book, I think, in my opinion. Anyway, right. So I'm now going to come to, following on from my last question, which was what size should the book be and how many pages should it be? This is a question I get asked often. How much will it cost to print? And they've given me no details. I've written a book. How much will it cost me? And I'm like, right. How many pages? What size? Is it color, black and white? Softback, hardback? How many copies do you want? They're all variable things. So I don't ask someone how much a book is going to cost, because until we have all the details and how many books you want to print, we can't answer that question.
No, that's the same with editing and proofreading. I might get an email saying, I've written a book, how much will it cost to edit it?
Exactly.
So you need those details, yes. Otherwise you can't possibly give a price.
So, and you've obviously got to take into consideration, how much will it cost? Well, you've got to look at how much the editing is going to cost. You've got to look at how much the typesetting is going to cost. Then you've got to look at how much the printing is going to cost and where you're going to print it. So until we know all of the information, and that is number of words, a sample, what size book you want, and how you're going to print it, then we can calculate how much it's going to cost. Obviously, like I've said already with the picture books, depending on how the bigger it is, the more it's going to cost you. Obviously, a color book is going to cost you more than a black and white book. And obviously, the more pages it's going to be, it's going to cost more as well. So you've got to take all of those into consideration. And also for editing, we can't tell you how much the edit's going to be until we see a sample, because you might get given a book that's brilliantly written that you know that's going to need a bit of a light touch, so it's going to cost X, whereas you might get a book that needs a really heavy copy edit and it's going to, you know, take you more time. So it really does depend on how well you write as well, which actually brings us quite nicely to your next question, which is what's the difference between editing and proofreading?
Yes, this is my last one. It's my last one that crops up quite commonly. I get asked, if I have my book edited, why do I need it proofread? The editing in series 2, in series 2 we talk a lot about the editing side of the publishing process. So there's a lot more detail there. But editing, if you're having a structural edit or a developmental edit, that's to do with the overall picture of your book, the big picture work to your book. You know, with fiction, does the plot work? Do the characters work? But it's a kind of overarching look at it with comments and feedback, how you can improve it. I mean, even some structural editing, I think, is done a stage before that. The book isn't even fully formed, it's notes and it's just bits and pieces put together, and the structural editor is then called to kind of pull those things together and make it all work with a story thread. Then my speciality is line and copy editing, so I focus more on the minutiae, line by line, literally going through it line by line. And that's not just making sure the grammar works, it's making sure that the text flows, that there isn't repetition, that there isn't inconsistency. And I can, if a book hasn't had a developmental edit, I can also make notes on plot flaws because things will leap out. But that side of the line editing process will be, it won't be as in-depth as a full developmental edit. But yes, so the line edit is much more about working on the flow of the text so that the reader has a really good experience, because you don't want the reader to be tripping up with a sentence that doesn't quite make sense, or the grammar's slightly off, or you just want the reader to be immersed in your story with nothing jarring that pulls them out of that story. So that's what the editing side does. But the proofreading, I think of it as a completely different thing. The proofreading will generally happen after the book has been laid out, ready for publishing. It's more about checking, just checking for any final errors. Sometimes errors crop up in the editing process. If I usually edit in Word, and I use a tool called Track Changes, which means that everything I amend, every correction is marked up in red on the document. But if you can imagine a heavily edited book where you end up with a lot of red markup, it can sometimes be really difficult to see in that for the editor if you've put in an extra space, if you've missed off a full stop, if you've got full stop in the wrong place. Those kind of things, when there's a lot of red markup, can be hard to pick up. And that's what the proofreading is for. It's to smooth out any final things. Also, anything that might have cropped up in the layout, because occasionally things can go adrift. And I think particularly perhaps for business books where you've got tables and subheadings and main headings and lists and bullet points, all those things need to be checked, that the formatting is consistent, that the subheadings have capitals in the right places. There's just an awful lot to check at the layout stage to make sure that the book is as perfect as it can be. And I say as perfect as it can be because as an editor and a proofreader, I've only got human eyes, and it's incredibly easy for things to slip through. So we can never guarantee that it will be 100% error-free. It's just impossible. I'm sure many of you will have read books from big publishers and found errors. They leap out to you because you've maybe read a 300-word book with 2 errors in. They leap out to you. When you're finding lots of errors, they're not going to leap out to you in the same way. But anyway, we do our absolute best. But so yes, your book needs editing to make the prose really sing. Mm-hmm. But your book also does need proofreading because that finished copy needs to be polished.
Yeah, definitely. And also I'm a human, so I make mistakes. You know, I don't mean to, but sometimes I do. So usually the proofreading happens after layout. So Alexa, you can then catch anything that I've missed as well. It's easily done. So yeah, proofreading is really important. And I always encourage my authors to have that extra proofread at the end. We've got 2 more questions because we're going to talk about the audio version. How do you get your book done as an audiobook? It's quite a complicated process. And the next question I'm going to talk about is what style to follow. So I got asked this question just the other day, actually, the Warwick Anthology. So the Warwick University do an anthology every year, and it's a writing MA, and they do a yearly anthology where they showcase their work. Now, a very common question that they ask is what style should they use? Now, there are various styles out there. There's the Chicago, what's it called? The
Chicago Manual of Style.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's US. There's also Newhart's rules as well. Again, US. So the US has a different styling to books than the UK, funnily enough. And here are a couple of them. So, and funny enough, I'm going to contradict myself as well, because, you know, one of the biggest differences between UK and US is quote marks. Now, I'm talking about smart quote marks here, which are the curly quote marks, not the straight quote marks. Don't ever use straight quote marks. I don't know why they've even come into existence.
Neither do I.
Don't use them. Smart quotes are the ones where they curl to the left or the right, depending on where they appear on the sentence. Okay. So the old-fashioned English style, UK style, would be if someone's speaking, you do a double quote mark around speech. In the US, it's single quote marks around speech. Now, the UK has adopted the US style, and I actually think it looks much nicer. I think double quotes around speech just looks really old-fashioned. I much prefer single quotes around speech. So that's number 1. Number 2, the whole hyphen dash n dash m dash rule. And this is a real common one. So a hyphen is used in between words. Give me a word that's hyphenated, Alexa. Part-time, is that hyphenated?
Part-time, yes. And well-known, if it comes before, a well-known actor would have a hyphen.
That's got a hyphen. Then you've got a n dash. Now, this is used between dates, for example. So 1972 to 1985 will have an n dash. And it's called an n dash because, do you know, Alexa, why it's called an n dash?
I probably should. Should I know that?
You should.
Should I know that?
An n dash is called that because it's the width of a capital N.
Ah, that makes sense, yes.
Right. And then you have an M dash.
Yes, and that's called it because it's the width of a capital M. I've got it.
So now Chicago style uses M dashes, which is the longer dash, as a substitute for commas or brackets. So it's as an aside type piece of writing. And usually what happens in the States or over in the US is it's a long dash with no spaces either side. Now, funnily enough, in the UK, they've gone, nah, we don't like that. We're not having that. We use an N dash with spaces either side. And I actually think that looks much nicer myself. And I got asked this question just the other day from the Warwick Anthology, asking, should they use the Newhart rules M dash rule, which is, you know, instead of a bracket or a comma, so you have a word, no space, long dash, next letter for the word, or the N dash with spaces either side. And I've said, personally, I prefer the N dash with spaces either side. To me, just looks nicer. However, I like to use an M dash if a word is being cut off at the end of speech. I just think that looks really nice. I don't like using an ellipsis. Sometimes people do. And I don't like using the N dash rule, as in a space N dash for that. I like a big M dash. So say, for instance, someone's talking and they get interrupted and they're just about to say stop, and you type out ST, you're about to say stop. It's obviously very obvious you're about to say stop. I would do ST M dash no space to denote the fact that the person's being interrupted. I kind of like to mix and match, you know, follow my own rules, Alexa's rules, right? And that's perfectly fine. I always like when I'm writing I don't like business books that don't indent the first line of a new paragraph. I don't like that in a business book. You see it quite often where books just have spaces to denote the different paragraphs. I don't like it. I much prefer an indented paragraph, but there's no rule. It's not right nor wrong. And it depends on what you want visually. I don't know, are there any style rules that you like or dislike, Alexa? Oh, the whole ellipsis. Should there be a space either side of the ellipsis?
Yes.
Or spaces within the ellipsis?
Yeah, often because I've worked with publishers on editing and proofreading, they have their own house styles. So with the ellipsis, there's one publisher that I've worked for that calls it, well, they were calling it always use a spaced ellipsis. And I thought they meant space either side of the ellipsis, but they all actually meant space either side, but also a space between each dot. The Newhart's rules, it's the rules part that makes people think it's fixed and it's got to be that way. But I think publishing houses develop their own style, and obviously you have to fit in with their particular style, but they're not necessarily following the rules to a particular extent. And I always, with the ellipsis, thought it just looks wrong to have a space either side. But then I was reading something a while ago, and it sounds as though that is more correct, but there is so many little finicky things, and I think very often it does come down to it being a matter of choice.
I agree.
I mean, obviously there are particular things. For instance, in speech, if you say hello, how are you, that's a question, so you do need a question mark at the end, how are you, and you do need the question mark to go inside the speech mark. So there are certain grammatical conventions that it is really important to adhere to, but there are other things where it's just a bit flexible.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Just because it says Newhart rules doesn't mean that is the rule, right? Yes. As you said. So I have a house style that I give to my editors that I like as well. For instance, I like contractions if possible. So instead of saying it is, I like it's with an apostrophe S. I just think it makes it sound nicer. But, it's kind of really up to you what you like the look of more. But I think you do need to know the basics. So, for instance, using the ampersand and instead of the full typed out word and is a no-no, unless it's in a title, and unless it's in a title specifically. Like you might just have chapter titles that always use the ampersand because of it looks stylistically, it looks nicer. But obviously when you're writing, you should never use the ampersand and you should always type it out. So things like that, there are definite rules of yes and no. I'm sure, though, your editor and your typesetter will be able to help you depending on which one you want to go with. But like with the ellipsis, one of my editors always insists on a space between the dots. I'm not really that bothered. I think it depends on where it is being shown on whether or not it looks okay. I think as long as you're consistent. Now, very quickly, the last question, because this has been a longer episode than we thought, I think. How do you produce an audio version of a book? Now, this is a very complicated question, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. The Book Refinery actually does do audio versions of your book, so do get in touch. Basically, though, you can't just record your book and upload it onto Amazon from your phone. It just doesn't work that way. The way that Amazon expects your book to be produced is in chapters, and it needs to adhere to their upload requirements. I would never suggest trying to record your own book unless you have a soundproof room, because the audio quality needs to be really good. And I believe Amazon check the audio quality, and if it isn't good enough, they will reject it. And you have to upload it. Obviously, if you upload to Amazon, you can only then sell your book through Amazon. It's not just a question of recording into a phone or a microphone and uploading it. It's not how it works. There's a much longer process. Go and do your research if you want to. There's nothing to say you can't do a podcast like we've done, or to record chapters of your book. Alexa, you're at the moment recording Kylie's Blight of the Bonnets on your Facebook page, aren't you?
Yes.
And you can actually use those Facebook recordings then and probably splice them all together if you wanted to, but that's how you're using an audio version of the book. Steve Udell does Story Time with Steve on his Facebook page as well, which is very popular. People can just, tune in to his page and hear him reading. So there are various ways that you can do this. The other quick question I'm going to answer as well is, how do you find an illustrator? Because this is another really common question. And you know what? Probably one of the best ways of finding an illustrator is to actually go onto Instagram, look through the search function of children's illustrators, and you will get a plethora of children's illustrators, because again, it all depends on the style that you want. There are so many out there, from digital artists to watercolor artists to pen and ink. You need to find out which one you like. Obviously, Kylie Dixon does illustrating. I know she's pretty much booked up though until next year, so do get in touch with her, because she might well be the perfect person for your project. But basically, again, go do your research. What kind of illustrations do you want? What kind do you like? Do you like the computer graphic type illustrations? The person that did Holly Taylor's book, Georgia, who's only 15, if you can believe that, Georgia Hutchinson, she's over on Instagram. She did all of her illustrations on a tablet. So she did computer style illustrations. And obviously they give off a very different look depending on what it is you want. Rachel Sligo, who we're going to be doing her book, I think you've just got her book to edit. She does watercolor illustrations, and then she finishes them. She does a combination of the two. She does watercolor illustration style on a computer, but using a watercolor style pen. So it really depends on the type of illustrations you want. But go do your research and go over. Instagram's really the place to find the illustrator. And do remember, you're going to have quite a large budget. Illustrators are not cheap. They're expensive. You can spend up to, well, anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 per book for illustrations, depending on how many you want. It's going to be a big part of your project budget. So go and find your illustrator first, then calculate how many pictures you can afford, and then you'll be able to work out then how many pages it can be, depending on your prose, etc., etc.
But try not to be put off. If you've got a children's book in your head and think, well, I can't draw, that's not a reason to be put off, because there are people out there who can draw
exactly
fantastically. I'm not one of them, I hasten to add. My stick people don't even look like stick people. So don't come to me for your illustrating.
Fair enough. Anyway, so that's all the questions we've had. I think we've had loads actually.
Yes.
We've whittled on long enough, so we're going to go. Next week, we are talking about terms and things you need to know for a picture book. And so common terms that are used in the industry that you might not understand what they mean. So we thought we would quickly go through what those are, and then you are informed with what the technical people are talking about when they refer to these particular terms. And that's it.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope those questions helped you. Look forward to being here again next week.
And if you have any questions, come and follow us on our socials. We're on Instagram, Facebook. We've got the group as well. Come and connect with us, and feel free to ask us any questions as well, because we might have another session of questions in a later series. You never know. So anyway, take care, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.